Well, welcome back to the Seven Sons Farm Life Show. Today is going to be more of a teaching episode, right, Blake?
It is.
We're taking the 5 principles made popular by Gabe Brown, regenerative farming principles, and we're just going to talk about how we would apply those to the garden setting. So all that coming up today's episode. So, Blake, we wouldn't consider ourselves master gardeners, right?
Definitely not for myself, that's for sure.
No,
but I do enjoy gardening.
I do too. It gives me a great appreciation just for food. And I think I would encourage anyone to garden. If you haven't gardened before, the process is so visceral.
Yep.
It's a way of, feels like nourishment to the soul at the same time. And the food obviously nourishes
like
your body. It is, and you gain this greater, deeper appreciation for your food. So
You really do.
Now, Blake, so we're not master gardeners, but we do have a lot of experience over the last 20 years of regenerative farming principles, and we've often been asked by our customers, how would I apply these principles to my backyard garden? So that's what we're talking about today. We've been experimenting a little bit with regenerative farming principles and applying that to our garden. We're just going to show you, at least take you into our gardens, especially if you're new to gardening. We'll walk you through kind of our garden setup. And
because you actually just put a garden in this year, right?
Because we moved to a new place. So
start from scratch.
Yeah. Can you explain your garden setup at your place?
Yeah, so basically we have raised beds, and we have 4 raised beds that are 4x8, and then we also have some 4x4 square beds there. And we have, put, this is like our 3rd year, I believe. But we started off when we put down cardboard, which I think you did as well.
Yeah.
But you can see there that, there is no weeds coming up through the mulch in between the beds.
Yep.
And that has been really, really nice. There's a few poking through, but for the most part, it is really, really weed-free in between the beds.
Why'd you go with raised beds? I know growing up on the farm, we always just had a garden out, a garden patch, and didn't do raised beds. What do you like about raised beds?
Oh, there's a couple things. One is you don't have to lean over so far to weed the garden or just work in the garden. So that is nice on your back. And then also you can just add whatever, compost that you want to add to it. So
you're starting with what you want to start with versus what's already there on the ground. So actually,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, that's how I got started this year. And you actually built these. You had extra ones that you were nice enough to give to us since we just moved. And so we have 2 of these. Yep. So what we did, we took your advice, and we, after building the beds, we put down
basically compost.
Well, cardboard first
to
keep grass and things from growing up. And then you had a compost pile at your place. So
I've been working on it for several months. So it was a nice compost pile.
It's beautiful stuff. And that's one tip I would say that, if you have a raised bed garden, that's a great...
Start off right
if you can. Now you can always improve. The regenerative principles for farming, the whole point is you improve with where you are. So if you're watching this and you're not happy with the soil, the principles we're going to talk about today, you can definitely make improvements. So I put cardboard down, added that compost, put the mulch around, and that's been a great setup for me this year. I don't know if you do this, Blake, but I added string to kind of section it off. I found that pretty helpful.
Yeah, I didn't this year, but I noticed you did, and I like that idea.
One thing I will say is keep it simple when you're getting started. And you have 5 kids, I have 5 kids.
Life can't be overwhelming.
Busy. No, so I was fine just starting off with 2 beds. It's not, I would like to expand that for sure. But I didn't want to get overwhelmed this year and wanted something that us and the kids could just do successfully the first year.
Well, you don't want it to be a burden.
Exactly. So, Blake, let's talk about these principles. Can you lead us off? What is principle number 1 as far as regenerative? And again, we're talking about 5 principles that Gabe Brown has taught us and has really made popular, kind of these 5 core principles of regenerative agriculture. What's principle number 1?
Principle number 1 is minimal disturbance. And you really want to focus on not disturbing the soil.
When you till the soil, it's like a hurricane and an earthquake to all the soil life.
Yep. And then all the carbon goes up in the atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. And nowhere in nature do you see tillage. Nature never, ever tills. The most tillage that happens in nature is the earthworms under the soil. Soil surface doing all the kind of helping to mix in the organic matter, aerate, and all that. So
when you run the tiller through, you're just kind of chopping up them little worms.
So I've seen different things, and I want to try them next year. But where some folks will put first they'll just, anything that's growing there, they'll either chop off, weed eat down. Better yet, if you have a large vegetable patch, bring cattle or animals in there and let them graze and manure and kind of punish the soil. But then I've seen people that will lay down cardboard and maybe put a thin layer of compost down over that, and then kind of pop holes through the cardboard and plant. And that's one way to not disturb the soil. So you can look up on YouTube. There's different methods that people do for. Probably look up like no-till gardening, and you'll find
there's
ideas.
a lot of great resources out there on that.
But just don't. The key here is don't underestimate the value of no-till and not disturbing from year after year. Not disturbing. It's amazing what can happen under the soil after 3 or 4 years of absolutely no disturbance. We've experienced that on our farm, Blake.
On a large scale.
We have increased on a large scale organic matter rates from 2% to how much?
4 to 6% right now.
Yeah, and remember, every 1% of organic matter increases water holding capacity per acre by 20,000 gallons per acre.
That's huge.
That transforms landscapes and farmland across the country, and it can transform your garden over time as well. So don't underestimate this idea of getting creative about how not to till. And of course, this is an easy one. Stop tilling between the rows, right? When something's growing. Instead, use mulch. So that's something I'm doing this year, is just putting mulch down. And for one thing, it's easier. I'm not pulling as many weeds, and I'm not tilling and disturbing the soil.
Yep.
So Blake, our second principle is what's called armor on the soil. Maybe explain how we do that at Seven Sons in our pasture-based setup.
Yeah, so we're all grass-fed, so we have 500 acres of all perennial pastures. So as the cattle are going through and the hogs and the chickens, we're only taking about half of the forage that's there. So half of that growing plant is only getting eaten by the animals. The other half remains there and is trampled down, and that creates like this blanket over the soil, and it shades it out from the sun, and so it just keeps the temperature nice and cool in the soil.
So we're always, what's fascinating, if you walk out in our pastures, and this is something that we look at even if we're visiting other farms, you see green growing grass, right? But if you pull back the green growing grass, you want to see this layer of litter, of old dead plant material. And you only get that with proper grazing techniques. But you just explained some of the benefits. One of the other benefits is you have this litter that's constantly feeding the soil life.
You do.
All the microorganisms in the soil, it's just feeding them. And of course, since we're not tilling, we're not disturbing their life cycle. So they're living there, and they have a constant food source.
Yeah, something's really neat is when you go down there and you peel back some of that old litter, you can see all the earthworm castings and all the earthworm holes going down into the soil.
They're just pulling, those earthworms are pulling that back down into the soil. So you always want litter or armor on the soil. It protects it from the elements, and it feeds the soil life. There's so much synergy that happens there. So, Blake, I think that plays in really good to principle one. Without tilling, you would use mulch to cover around growing plants, and so
it acts as a weed suppression, basically.
Yeah, so that's armor on the soil right there. So, principle number 3 of regenerative farming would be plenty of diversity. Mix it up, right?
Yes.
So explain to us the benefits just in our pasture-based system, our perennial system, the benefits of having as much diversity as possible on the soil, benefit for the soil.
Yeah, benefit for the soil. So each plant is doing something different for the soil. So some plants have shallow roots, some plants have really deep tap roots. So they're going down, the deep tap rooted plants are going down and grabbing minerals and bringing them up to the surface, making them available to the other plants. And then there's just from the animal side of it, the animals need different plants in order to have a healthy immune system. So we want to try to mimic that same pattern in our gardens, and it can happen with insects. There's predators, and then there's the insects that you want.
Well, and we were just out in the pasture a couple weeks ago, Blake, and I noticed there was a lot of a certain bug out there. And I asked you, I said, "This is beneficial?" I forget I don't know what insect it was, but there was a ton of them out there. And I asked you, are these a problem for farms? And you said, if we only had one species out there in the pasture,
it would be a problem.
It would decimate the crop. But we really don't see the harmful effects of, even though there's all these insects out there, we don't see a problem with it because they're only going to thrive with certain species, and they can't decimate every species out there with us. So it's you don't really notice it. So same thing with a garden. There's so much synergy to have diversity there for the soil.
Just want a nice polyculture going on
and
in
again,
the garden.
Nature never tills, and nature never monoculture never exists in nature. You don't see only cornfields or only bean fields.
You do not.
And so you don't want a garden that just has one or two types of crops in one area. Is probably a recipe for trouble. You'll be more susceptible to insect pressure,
Yes.
and you're not going to have that diversity within the soil. And for example, Blake, doesn't a thistle plant help provide a certain nutrient to the soil?
Yeah, phosphorus.
Phosphorus.
Yes.
And what about, actually, this might be in the quiz later, so I'm going to hold off on that little fun fact I was going to do. So far, Blake, we've gone through 3 principles. What's number 4? I think it's cover crops.
Cover crops.
So how would you apply that in a general sense? In mass scale agriculture, the idea is after a season of corn or soybeans, instead of leaving the soil bare throughout the dormant season, you'd come in with a cover crop where you're planting something that has time to grow up in the fall, and it covers the soil until we're ready to plant the next spring.
Yes.
So same principle, right? If you're gardening?
It is. Same principle as your garden, it's just on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
So when your garden is, for instance, last year when our garden was done for the year and we harvested our last potatoes and stuff, we put down wheat and radishes. Those are the 2 things that I had floating around. If we could have more diversity, it'd been great. But put those down, and by April or May, they were a foot tall, and we had to mat it down with the cardboard and stuff to get it to die. But that's what we're after.
Because the number one, tool for regenerating your land is having green growing roots in the ground. Yes. That's the process of regeneration. You're bringing carbon, nitrogen, pumping it into the soil. You can grow more plants that way. Your soil doesn't regenerate unless there's living roots growing, right?
And some of them cool season plants, they will still stay green all year long during the wintertime. So there's 365 days in the year, and most of the time our garden is only growing something active, maybe 100 days, 150 at the max.
So you can triple the amount of time that your soil is getting regenerating, feeding off of the atmosphere and feeding the soil life and protecting it, keeping the soil warmer, right, in the winter by having a cover crop. So it's not a big no-no if you're trying to follow regenerative gardening practices and improve your soil in your garden. A big no-no would be leaving it dormant through a third or a half the year.
Yep.
So
keep something green grown.
Like principle number 5, and this maybe gets a lot more challenging, especially in urban settings, but overall for regenerative, to really be regenerating your land, animal impact is absolutely critical.
Yes.
And so that's one of the reasons in a perennial based setup like we have at Seven Sons, we've been able to make so much progress so fast in regenerating our soils because we have that animal impact. This would be, if you have a larger vegetable patch, then by all means you should have some goats or lambs or some cattle around that in the fall you can come in, and in the spring you could come in and graze your vegetable patch. That would, some of the benefits, Blake, would be obviously the manure impact, the hoof impact, but also even the saliva impact of that residue on the grasses stimulates the plants, right? Yep. One thing I think of, Blake, is as we mentioned when we first started, is not tilling at the beginning of the season. Instead of going to the work of going out there and getting a weed eater and trimming it yourself, just let the animals out there and let them graze it down and reduce some of the residue and incorporate that residue into the soil.
Yeah, and something that you could incorporate when it comes to animals on a smaller scale would be if you had some goats or some sheep, something that would be able to eat through the beds a little bit during the early spring or late fall. Yep. That would be fine. I mean, we obviously wouldn't want cattle walking through our raised beds, but
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I even know of a lot of people that will turn their chickens out in the garden, and they're eating a lot of the scraps and adding some manure to it and scraping through and eating some bugs as well. So there's ways you can incorporate livestock, but it has to be on a small scale and nothing like a cow or something probably.
Okay, Blake, heading into intermission here, I thought I'd start with a fun fact. Did you know that 78% of the air we breathe is made up of nitrogen?
Yes, it is.
Yes, and a farmer should know this, right? Because one of the main costs that a farmer has, a conventional farmer, is buying synthetic nitrogen, applying to the soil. Why would we ultimately we don't need to do that as regenerative farms. There's hundreds of thousands of pounds above every acre of free nitrogen.
It's just floating up there.
Exactly. But there is a certain plant that sequesters, I don't know if sequester is the right word, but captures nitrogen from the atmosphere and puts it into the soil. The quiz, so this is the quiz here for this month's episode, is
I like this. This is a good one.
What plant captures nitrogen from the atmosphere and puts it in the soil? There's a certain plant that does it through the root system, and first person to guess with the correct answer in the comments below will get the $20 online credit. So, okay, Blake, could you give us a kind of a rapid fire update? Cool things going on here at the farm.
Yeah, so we have something really unique. The last couple years, we've had a couple baby foxes.
I actually have them up there on the screen here for us.
Right there. So this is right outside of our brother Brooks and his wife Catherine's place. And these baby foxes have been playing outside all spring long. And they're getting a little bigger now, but they are not very bashful. They come out, jump around in the yard, play around on some old playground equipment that we have there for them.
So Brooks has that big dozer right out his backyard, huh?
Yeah, I call it a swing set for the kids. Playground for
Swing
his
set.
kids when he has kids someday.
Foxes love playing around. Those are red foxes?
Red fox, yep.
Okay.
I think this is the third year that there's been a den real close to there. So
they are pretty cute.
They are.
That's pretty cool. That's one thing we enjoy about the farm. There is a lot of wildlife diversity that it's just a haven for wildlife.
Yes, it is. We love to see that. Oh, something else is we got a pond that we've been trying to get fixed up here.
We're restoring a couple of old ponds on the farm, so it's been too long. They need some attention. So you've completely drained one pond, and you're basically going to clean it out,
and
we're going to let it fill back up.
We are. So we're going to kind of expand it maybe too.
And the goal is to have this done before Farm Fest, which is going to be really tricky.
TikTok.
So. And you have been working hard, Blake, and the rest of the outdoor team, getting just a lot of prep ready for Farm Fest. You had a bunch of dirt work out by the new buildings that what you're looking at here is ideally going to be part of the parking. For Farm Fest. So
we planted grass there now, so it's starting to come up a little bit, so that's good. We need that to get a good sod base there before people start parking in it, but we're making progress.
Cool. Yep. And there's other projects I know you're working on. One fun, cool project that we're doing is we're fixing up an old cabin back in I think we've talked about that in a couple episodes. So we're actually getting power back there and kind of really going to fix that up to be.
It was our old farm store.
Exactly. We pulled it back to the cabin and kind of a work in progress. We'll keep everyone updated on that. And finally, Blake, I've been restoring the ranch where I live, which
what
is
a project.
3 miles from the main farm, and we finally have cattle there. The fences are all fixed up at least to the point where they're going to hold cattle in. I still have more work to do.
Yep.
Water lines are up and going, and I'm putting in a separate driveway for the farm. That's still a work in progress, but we were able to get cattle a little later. But here, the 1st of June, we finally got cattle there, so that was cool.
So, Blaine, gardening can be overwhelming. Do we have any resources for people?
Yes, if you want to continue your journey, in the description below, we'll have a list of links and resources that are all about applying regenerative farming practices to gardening.
So we found these very helpful.
Exactly. That's it for this episode. Don't forget to comment below and participate in the quiz.
Don't forget about the quiz.
That's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next time.